The story you heard about Pedro is incomplete. They didn't tell you everything. And perhaps that is why, even today, millions of people carry a distorted image of the disciple who most resembles us. Have you ever heard that Peter denied Jesus because he was a coward? Because he was afraid? Because he couldn't withstand the pressure? But what if I told you that he didn't deny it the way everyone thinks? Are there details in the Bible that completely change this story? Details that reveal not a man's weakness, but the depth of a love that almost no one notices. Today, we're going back to that night, the darkest night of Pedro's life. And when you see what really happened, maybe you'll never talk about him the same way again. Get ready. The Peter you think you know is not the Peter of the Bible. And at the end of this video, you'll decide for yourself, did Pedro betray, or did he try to love more than anyone else? Before we talk about Peter's fall, we need to talk about the unfair burden that was placed on him. Most people only remember one moment, Peter denying Jesus. And because of that, many label him as cowardly, weak, and hesitant. But that's not the whole truth. Who was Peter in the Bible? Not a coward, not a traitor, but he was an ordinary man who tried to be extraordinary. A fisherman who gave it all up. A disciple who spoke when no one else dared to open their mouth. A friend who promised to stand by Jesus until the end, and who truly tried to keep that promise. The problem is that people, they judge Peter for the fall, but almost no one pays attention to the walk. And it is precisely this historical injustice that we are going to undo now, because Peter didn't deny it in the way everyone thinks. And when you understand that, you'll see that the label they put on him never fit the Peter of the Bible. If there is one disciple who never deserved the label of coward, it is Peter. He was the only one who asked to leave the boat during the storm, the only one who walked on water, the only one who drew a sword against an entire escort of armed soldiers. While everyone else retreated, Peter advanced. While everyone remained silent, Pedro asked. While everyone else was hiding, Pedro wanted to get closer and closer. This is the man the Bible portrays. An impulsive man? Yes. Imperfect? Very. But deeply in love with Jesus. And this is where the story begins to change, because no one who truly reads Peter's life story can say that he was a coward. It doesn't suit your personality, it doesn't match his history, and it definitely doesn't match what he did that night. It is precisely this courage, this need to stay close to Jesus, which explains what happened at the moment of the denial. But to understand this, we need to go back to the night when all the disciples fled, and only one continued following Jesus from afar. Everyone knows the phrase, Peter denied Jesus, but almost no one understands the context of that. What they preach out there is simple. Peter was afraid. Pedro hesitated. Pedro was weak, but that's not the whole truth. This is just the surface. The Bible never says that Peter denied it out of cowardice. He never says that he wanted to abandon Jesus. He never says that he decided to turn his back on them. Actually, the text shows exactly the opposite. Denial is not an isolated act. It's a desperate emotional reaction from a man who was going too far, alone. Pedro didn't deny it the way everyone thinks. He was in the only place where he could deny it, close enough to Jesus to be seen and close enough to the soldiers to be killed. And that's what changes everything. To understand why Peter denied it, we need to go back to the beginning of that night, when everyone ran away except him. When Jesus was arrested, no one stayed. Nobody. Everyone ran. Tiago ran away. Andre disappeared. Thomas disappeared into the darkness. Even John, the beloved disciple, drifted away too quickly. But Pedro did not run away. He followed Jesus from a distance, but he followed through narrow streets, among Roman guards, all the way to the inner courtyard where Jesus would be judged. This is not cowardice. This is crazy, or love, or both together. Pedro risked everything, alone. There was no one to protect him, no disciples nearby, no strategy. He went into enemy territory so as not to leave Jesus alone. And it is precisely in this environment, in that fire lit in the courtyard, in this cold of the early morning, that denial happens. Now yes, we are in the place where the truth will be revealed, because Peter refused, trying to stay close. The early morning was freezing. The fire crackled in the center of the courtyard. Soldiers murmured. Servants observed each unfamiliar face. Pedro had no business being there. It wasn't safe. He wasn't very smart. And definitely he wasn't a coward. He was surrounded by Roman guards, by armed servants, by people who hated followers of Jesus. And yet, he went in. He sat down near the fire. He tried to see where Jesus was. He tried to listen to what was happening inside the courtroom. He wanted to stay close. That was what mattered to him. But the closer Pedro tried to get, but he attracted attention. A suspicious look here, a suspicious question there, a face that recognized him from the night Jesus fed the multitude. Until someone, staring intently at him, says, "You were with him." And it is at this moment that the story changes course. Not because Peter is weak, but because his heart is about to be crushed by an even greater truth. Peter is so close to Jesus. Denying it is the only way to stay alive in there, and that doesn't diminish his courage. It only reveals his humanity. The third time, the phrase that Pedro never forgot echoed in the air. "I am certain that you were with him." Pedro feels his heart racing. The mind becomes confused. He doesn't know whether to run, take off his hood, wait, or move forward. You only know one thing. If he admits it, he dies right there. And then, for the third time, the words escape me. "I don't know this man." A rooster crows. The dawn trembles. Everything falls silent. And it is at that exact moment that the most devastating scene of Pedro's life takes place. Jesus turns his face away, and she looks directly at him. It wasn't a hateful look, not even out of contempt, not even "I told you so." It was a look of longing, of understanding, of love. Farewell. Her gaze pierced Pedro like a sword. It's a look that says, "I knew you were going to fall for it, but I also know that you will get up." Peter did not coldly deny Jesus. He denied it crying inside, because he was too close, because he tried to go it alone, because he didn't know how to love without losing himself. And when Jesus' gaze meets his heart, the ground disappears. Pedro falls to his knees. The air disappears from the lungs. The strong man collapses, and at that moment, everything we thought we knew about Pedro finally crumbles. Pedro runs, but not because he's a coward. He runs because he is broken. People imagine Peter fleeing as someone who deliberately betrayed Jesus, but that doesn't align with the Bible. It doesn't befit the man who risked his own life to enter that courtyard. He runs because it can't bear its own heart. He runs because Jesus' gaze showed him what he was really like. Strong on the outside, fragile on the inside. The Bible says that Peter cried bitterly, and this is one of the most weighty expressions in Scripture. This is not a superficial cry of regret. This isn't a cheap cry of shame. It's the cry of someone who loved so much, who couldn't bear having failed. This crying is not cowardice. These tears are the result of wounded love. Fear didn't kill Pedro. Guilt almost killed him. The pain was overwhelming, but above all, the feeling that he had disappointed the only man who believed in him. And here's the point that almost nobody understands. Peter did not deny Jesus because he wanted to abandon him. Pedro refused because he tried to get too close, and it burned inside. He did not run away from Jesus. He ran away from himself. And it is in this emptiness, in this silence of the early morning, in this emotional abyss, which begins the process that will lead to the most beautiful restoration of the Bible. Peter's fall was not the end. It was the beginning of the man he needed to become. After the fall came the silence, the heaviest silence of Pedro's life. No conversation with the other disciples, no venting, no request for help. Pedro simply disappears. Not because he abandoned Jesus, but because he couldn't bear the weight of what he had done. He relives the scene over and over again. The bonfire, the accusations, the rooster crowing, and the gaze of Jesus piercing his soul. And those words, the ones he never imagined he would say, echo in his head, "I don't know this man." Pedro repeats this to himself thousands of times, not to justify, but because he doesn't believe he was able to say it. Meanwhile, news arrives that crushes his heart even more. Jesus was taken away. Jesus was condemned. Jesus was crucified and buried. And Peter carries a guilt that no one else carries it anymore. He was the last disciple to look Jesus in the eye before the cross, and he failed. This silence is the valley of his soul, the dark night before the morning of grace, the pain before the restoration. A silence that seems to say, "It's over for me." Little did Peter know that Jesus was already preparing the reunion that would change everything. When Jesus resurrected, he could have gone after anyone, but he chose to go after Peter. The living Christ appeared to him in a personal way. It's not a group meeting. This is not a superficial conversation. Jesus is looking for the very man who fell, the man who cried, the man who carried the weight of guilt. And here's the detail that almost nobody notices. Jesus does not ask Peter to ask for forgiveness. Jesus does not say, "You denied me." Jesus doesn't say, "I told you so." None of that. Instead of pointing out the mistake, Jesus points to the heart. He asks only one thing: "Pedro, do you love me?" This question is not a demand. It's a cure. It's as if Jesus were saying, "I know you fell, but I also know why you fell. And I know that his love for me is real." Peter's restoration does not begin with guilt. It begins with love. And that changes everything, because Jesus didn't want a perfect disciple. I wanted a sincere disciple. And there on the beach, with the smell of burning coals, the same smell from the night of the denial, Jesus transforms Peter's greatest failure into the beginning of his mission. The conversation Peter has with Jesus is not about falling, it's about purpose. 3 times Peter denied it. Jesus asked 3 times, but not for the reasons everyone imagines. Many people believe that Jesus' 3 questions were a kind of correction, a settling of accounts, a proportionate punishment, but they weren't. Jesus did not repeat the question to remind Peter of the pain, but to remind Peter of the purpose. When Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Pedro replies, "You know that I love you." And Jesus responds with a mission: "Feed my sheep." And then Jesus asks again, not to humiliate Peter, but to rebuild it layer by layer. Jesus was not addressing Peter's guilt, he was activating his call. Every time Peter says, "I love you," Jesus places a burden on his hands, to care, protect, to feed, to lead. There, by the sea, Peter becomes more than just a disciple. He becomes pastor. Denial did not destroy the purpose. It simply prepared Peter to truly understand him. And when Jesus asks for the 3rd time, Peter does not respond with sorrow, but with surrender. "Lord, you know all things." This phrase is the turning point. Pedro finally stops trusting in his own strength, and he comes to trust completely in the gaze of the one who never abandoned him. And it is at this moment that Jesus does something even more profound. He doesn't return Peter to the point where he fell. He returns Peter to the point where he was born to be. Peter fell once, but he never again allowed that to define who he was. After the restoration, Peter is no longer the same. It is not the impulsive man who reacts without thinking, but it is not the shaken man who runs because his heart has collapsed. Pedro now understands something that no one understood before. The love of Jesus is stronger than shame. He becomes a leader, a pastor, a man who speaks with authority before crowds, the apostle who opens the door of faith for thousands. But the final test was yet to come. Years later, when the Roman Empire captures him, Pedro receives the same opportunity he had that morning: deny and live, or confess and die. And this time, without hesitation, without stumbling, without running away. Pedro chooses the path that true love chooses. He doesn't deny it. He doesn't back down. He doesn't give up. Pedro faces death with a courage that no one would ever expect from the fisherman who wept in the high priest's courtyard. And before being crucified, he asks for something that no one would forget. I am not worthy to die as my Lord did. Crucify me upside down. This is no story for cowards. This is not a story about a traitor. This is the story of a man transformed because of the grace he found on the beach in the eyes of Christ in response to the question, "Do you love me?" Peter did not die denying Jesus. Pedro died proving that he loved him. After everything we've seen, it becomes clear that Pedro is not a story of negation. It's the story of a transformation. Pedro didn't deny it out of cowardice. He didn't deny it because he wanted to run away. He did not deny it because he abandoned Jesus. He denied it, trying to stay close. He denied it because he was in the only place where someone could deny it. He refused because he didn't yet know how to love without fear. The Bible does not hide its fall, but it doesn't reduce him to it either. Pedro is the only one who enters the courtyard, the only one who faces danger alone, the only one who looked Jesus in the eye that morning, the only one who cries until he can't anymore, the only one who runs because his heart can't bear the pain. And he is also the only one for whom Jesus prepares a personal reunion, the only one to whom Jesus asks, "Do you love me?" The only one to whom Jesus entrusts the sheep, the only one who rises up to lead the nascent church. The fall did not define Pedro. It was the starting point for the man he was born to be. Therefore, the opening statement is now fulfilled. Pedro didn't deny it the way everyone thinks. He fell trying to love, and he stood up, determined to love until the end. And perhaps that's why his story touches us so deeply, because Peter is not the perfect disciple. He is the disciple that we are, a failing heart, but it will return, a heart that falls more than loves, a heart that Christ restores. Every time you ask, "Do you love me?" Now that you've heard the whole truth, tell me, which part of Peter's story resonated with you the most today? Was that Jesus' gaze? Was that Peter crying? Was it the restoration on the beach? Or was it realizing that he didn't deny it the way you'd been taught your whole life? Write it here in the comments. I really want to read what God spoke to your heart in this story. And I ask you one thing. Don't leave without doing the same thing Peter did. He stood up. He's back. He followed Jesus again. If this story touched you, if you identified with any part of it, if you too have fallen, cried, and been restored, so subscribe to the channel now. Because here you'll hear more stories like this, stories that heal, that restore, that uplift, stories that God is using to speak to thousands of people. So comment here, "I came back too," and sign up to walk with us. Because the next story will speak even more to your heart.